All righty, so we're going to do the second part of El Presidente notes. And how we're going to start this off is I want you, not in partners, can't do that, but on your own, what are all the things that we demand that the president fix? Or what are the things that, when I say fix, that he's responsible for? So look at it that way. Okay, so I'll move my camera on me a little bit. All right, let's go down to the roles of the president. And these are, think of Article 2 in the Constitution. I would write that up here. And that's where it talks about the president. Article 1 is talking about Congress. Article 2 is talking about the president. Congress has the power of the purse. The president has the power of the sword. I'm showing you a pen. Think of it as like writing executive orders or using force in the military. And so that's essentially what they are talking about there. So in this, you're going to have what's called formal and informal powers. Formal powers are written in the Constitution. Informal are not in the Constitution. So first role is he is chief legislator. He proposes legislation. Think about Obamacare. Think about President Bush and his No Child Left Behind, some examples I've given you before. And one of the things here is he can sign laws and sometimes uses a signing statement. This here is an example of an informal power. So what's a signing statement? So the President Trump just did this recently. And in a signing statement, when you're signing a law, this is what you believe or how you believe the law should be interpreted. So that's what this says here. It gives notice on the interpretation of the law. So by issuing a signing statement, you are basically changing the meaning of that law without changing the meaning of that law, if that makes sense to you. And so that's essentially, it's an informal power. It's just how you intend to interpret the law that you just signed. So that's one. Another thing is you can veto legislation. And remember that you can't use line item veto. You can call a special session of Congress and you make the State of the Union address. By the way, when you veto legislation, there's this thing called a veto message. And this is the message from the president that he's not going to sign a bill if it's passed, and he's going to, again, veto that legislation. Or, and this is why. Remember, if he doesn't sign a bill, it can become law in 10 days. But veto legislation or a veto message is what he might use here. Making the State of the Union, that's in the Constitution. So these are all those things that are in the Constitution that the president can do. And these are the checks on it. The Congress need not pass the legislation, and they can also override the veto there. But just understand, one of the biggest things, though, of the president now when it comes to his roles, whether it's chief legislator or executive, is his power to persuade. And think of the bully pulpit or the electronic throne, you might say, is when the president gets in front of the media, like he's doing now every day, and says, this is why something needs to be done. Because nobody cares about anybody else. The president is the most important. Don't get me wrong. People care about the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, but not as much as they care about the president. So he uses his access to the media. Think Twitter. Think President Trump. He uses Twitter to his advantage. Instagram, because it goes right to the people. So that's a big one, the power to persuade. Because with this, he can log roll, he can trade votes. You vote for this, I'll make sure we vote for that. He can, again, go to the people to get support for something. Public opinion is huge because public opinion persuades congressmen to vote if they want to get reelected. All right, next role, chief executive. This is Article 2. Again, in the Constitution, this is the take care clause. So this is huge. So the take care clause just means essentially that you take care of the laws be executed. You make sure that those laws are enforced. And so because of this, because of the take care clause, the presidents have used this to abuse their power to justify impoundment, which means not allocating funds after they've already been allocated. Think Nixon and welfare. Suspension of habeas corpus. Lincoln did this during the Civil War because if he didn't, he knew that if he didn't tell people why they're being held captive, that he would lose the Civil War. Eavesdropping in the Bush 43rd administration because of 9/11 and the terrorism thing. And so those are just some quick examples of the take care clause, but in Article 2, this gives the president great power. He can appoint officials to office and can fire them. He issues executive orders. Executive orders are informal powers of the president, and these carry the force of laws. So that's another informal power right there, and that's huge. This is big because these executive orders can override Congress essentially with almost limitless powers, and every president abuses these powers. Just remember that, okay? So the executive orders is one example. Another example of informal power. And another one that goes along with that would be executive privilege. And that is the president does not have to let the people that give him advice speak in front of Congress or tell people what they were talking about in confidence. Because if he does that, if he doesn't protect people to be honest with them, then nobody's ever going to be honest with the president for fear of what could happen with them. So executive order and executive agreements are both examples of informal powers that the president has. And these are just some examples of executive orders. The internment of the Japanese, that was an executive order that hit California here hard. He also desegregated the military and the affirmative action. So these are some examples with that. Checks, Congress can pass laws and has the power of the purse to fund things. Senate can reject the appointments of the president when he tries to appoint people to office. You can get impeached and removed by the Senate. So House starts impeachment, Senate tries it, and the Supreme Court can strike down executive orders, which has happened to President Trump and other presidents as well. Commander-in-chief, the power of the sword here, power of the military. Again, the big conflict here is Congress declares war, but the president's the one in charge of the military. So you always have a conflict of power there. But this is a big one. So commander-in-chief, he's the head of the armed forces. Congress appropriates funds to the military. Congress declares war. And you have the War Power Act, which was trying to rein in the power of the president. So there's another thing. There's the checks on the presidential power. So he can't just constantly declare war. He's the chief diplomat. He's the power to set foreign policy, and which is huge because foreign policy is how we relate to other nations. Appoints and receives ambassadors, negotiates both treaties and executive treaties or executive agreements. An executive agreement, if he knows that Senate is not going to confirm, because Senate is the one who ratifies treaties, confirms them. To confirm the treaty, he uses an executive agreement, which is another informal power, to go around Senate and do an agreement shaking the hand of a senator, or not a senator, shaking the hand of another leader of another nation. And so this is another informal power. And this would carry the force of law. So we would then have, let's say with Canada, we would have a treaty with Canada if we just shook hands. So that's a big one. Obama did this a lot with the Middle East. And so doing executive agreements to stop something. Sorry, I just was distracted by President Trump saying the next couple of weeks could be tough. Negotiates congressional executive agreements, the leader of the nation, congressional and executive agreements. NAFTA would be one of those, an example of a congressional and executive agreement with that. Gives diplomatic recognition to foreign governments. Check. Congress appoints funds for foreign affairs, and Senate can reject ambassadors and treaties. So again, that power of the purse is big here because that's them using that check, the oversight against the president. First citizen and the ceremonial head of our nation toss out the first pitch of a baseball season. President Trump doesn't do that. The best example I ever saw with this, and you want to talk about charisma, you want to talk about being chief of state, you want to talk about being a president. During times of crisis, most of our presidents come and they don't talk politics. They just are America first. After 9/11, President George W. Bush, threw out the first pitch of the World Series that year between the New York Yankees and Arizona Diamondbacks. You had the Trade Center flag behind him. He gets there, no security around. The jets just flew over the stadium. He's wearing, I think it was a USA jacket, and the crowd is going crazy. Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, it didn't matter. He stood on that mound and threw a perfect pitch. That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen from a president. Mr. Westberg and I were talking about this the other day. When I talk about it in class, I get emotional, not like teary-eyed, but, well, I guess that's emotional. I get emotional thinking about it because when we needed a leader, we got a leader. And you can say all you want about President Bush. People criticized him so much. But during 9/11, right, wrong, or indifferent, he was the chief of state. He was a leader. And that was charisma. We need that from a president. And that's what people are criticizing President Trump for right now. He's not showing much of that. He lacks that. But anyway, ceremonial head of our nation. And this is big here. He's usually the first citizen, the most important citizen. Another one is he's a chief jurist. He appoints all federal judges, issues pardons, which means you can let people off. They should do this toward the end of their presidency, but they do it throughout as well. Check. The Senate can reject those judicial appointments and can place holds on appointments, much like they did with a bill. And the Senate can filibuster nominations of judges. And they've done that in the past, and they've threatened to do that, which basically kills that nomination of that federal judge. Non-constitutional roles. He is the head of the political party, which is another informal power. So you can always gauge how well somebody's doing if I get all these emails. If nobody really wants to be associated with the president being the head of the political party, because he can help an election or hurt an upcoming election. And he selects the party chairman and the national committee. And this is also where he has the VP nomination, the political patronage. That's when he goes and supports people that need it when they're fighting close battles, whether it's a governor, whether it's a senator or congressman, depends on who the congressman is. And so this is a big informal power. He oversees election strategies, issues and agenda, the political agenda, and also public policy. Public policy, build the wall. That wasn't a law. He was trying to create public policy and doing all that. Sorry, I'm annoyed by that. He's the chief economist responsible for the overall health of the economy. He gets all the credit and all the blame. That's a big one. And he proposes federal budget as we just talked about with that. So that's El Presidente Notes Part 2. And don't forget to, at the very bottom of these notes, list all of the areas we demand that the president fix. Oopsie.